Welcome to Part 6 of the Focus on the Family series. We're featuring the views of Dr. James Dobson, Associate Clinical Professor of Pediatrics at the University of Southern California School of Medicine, and author of best-selling books on the family, including Dare to Discipline, which has sold over 1 million copies. The programs you've seen, and the two that remain, were filmed during a citywide seminar in San Antonio, Texas, where 3,000 people gathered for this event. The first two parts in the series were devoted to the subject of discipline. The third was addressed to Christian fathering. The fourth and fifth programs were given to the storms of adolescence. And now we turn our attention to the final afternoon of the seminar, when Dr. Dobson talked about marriage for the first time. He discussed the content of his book, What Wives Wish Their Husbands Knew About Women, which dealt with the subject of depression in women. Let's join Dr. James Dobson in Laurie Auditorium for the first part of this two-part discussion.
Folks, please don't yawn at me. I don't think I can stand it if you yawn at me. If you yawn at me, I'm going to ask you to stand up and explain why. If you feel like you just can't help it, you know, sometimes through sheer fatigue, you just can't help it. And if a yawn is coming up your throat and there's nothing that you can do with it and you just can't escape it, the least thing you can do for me is give me a social yawn. Okay, you know what that is? That's where you grit your teeth and you hold your breath and you squeeze it out your eyes. That's okay. I'll take a social yawn, but no other kind. And I'm going to try to keep you awake as best I can. Maybe I'll be like the cross-eyed discus thrower. He didn't set many records, but he sure kept the crowd awake. I want to make a recommendation to you before we go much further, having to do with a game that's on the market now that you can get, which will help you talk together within the family. This is a game that I had nothing to do with. I endorsed it, my name's on it, but I don't have any financial stake in it, and it wasn't my idea, and I'm not here to sell you something. But it's a game that I believe in, and one that I think you'll find helpful, and it's called the Ungame. Has another name called Tell It Like It Is. And it's a very simple concept, has about 400 cards, and you take the cards one at a time, and it tells you to tell something to the other people who are playing the game about what you care about and who you are. Like there's one that says, describe the happiest day of your life, or name 3 things that you hope happen in the next year, or tell someone else who's playing the game something that you love about them or like about them. And it just pulls information out of you. And the only rule to the game is that you can't talk unless it's your turn. See, and it forces you to listen. And it just gets you into each other's world. We were playing the game in our family shortly after we first discovered it, and I had the responsibility of describing to my family the saddest day of my life. And I thought back quickly over my years. I told you this morning, until this year, I've had very few sad years in my life, or even sad days. And yet we have lost 4 members of our family this year. So this has been quite a year. But it comes to every family sooner or later. And we've grown through it, and the Lord's been with us through it. But the only 2 tough years I had before that were the junior high years, 7th and 8th grades. And my mind immediately went back to an event that took place in the 7th grade. I'll never forget it now. It was 11 o'clock in the morning on a cloudy day, but I had never remembered to even tell this to my wife until this game pulled it out of me. And on that day, my dad came to school to get me, 11 o'clock in the morning, and he said he wanted me to go by the office and we were going to check out and go home because he had something that he had to tell me. And when you find out what it is, you'll know something about my dad and how he identified with me, and he knew how it would react on me. And he cared enough to come down and tell me himself. And so we went by the principal's office, and I was afraid to ask my dad what had gone wrong because I could see it on his face that there was something that was troubling him. And we got out to the car, and finally I said, something's gone wrong, hasn't it, Dad? And he said, yes, Jim, it really has. I'm afraid I have some bad news for you, but I want you to take it like a man. I said, is it my mother? And he said, no. Then I said, it's my dog, isn't it? And he said, yes, I'm afraid it is. Now, folks, when I was 13 years old, my dog meant more to me than he should have been. He meant more to me than most people. With the exception of my mother and father, that dog played a very important role in my emotional economy at that time. That dog and I had something going together. I could talk to him when I couldn't talk to anybody else. And he met me out at the edge of the grass when I came home from school every day, and he wagged his tail at me. And nobody else ever did that for me. That dog and I had something going together, and if you're a dog lover, you understand that, and if you're not a dog lover, you're not ever going to understand that, so there's no sense trying to tell it to you. But that little dog and I were friends. My dad quickly told me what had happened. My little dog was out, and my mother was driving home, and she was about a block from home when my little dog saw her coming, and he ran out in the road to greet her, and apparently jumped up on the side of the car to greet her as she drove by, and he fell under the rear wheel of the car, and she ran over him. She pulled the car over to the side of the road and jumped out and ran back and bent over him and talked softly to him, and he could not greet her because she had broken his back. He had crawled across the road and then back into the road where he couldn't move because he was paralyzed. And he couldn't jump up to greet her as he usually would, but he could roll his little brown eyes, and he rolled his eyes up to see who she was, and when he saw her, he wagged his little tail in the back. And my little dog was still wagging his little tail there in the road when he died. And I think when my dad told me that, I thought I was going to die. Grief came up my throat. I had a tremendous lump in my throat, and I couldn't swallow, and I couldn't breathe, and I wanted to run away. And many of you probably experienced losses of parents at that time, much more intense than that. But that was a very, very intense moment for me. We went on home. I didn't go back to school that day. And I don't remember how I spent the balance of the day, although I do remember I wrote a poem to my dog, which I'm not about to read to you at this moment. But we buried my little dog later that day. And the reason that I remember it was late in the afternoon is because I don't just recall that event today, I have it photographed in my mind. You know, there's some events from childhood where you have the actual photographs, and I have color photographs in my mind of that event in the back of our property out behind the grapevine. We dug a little hole just as the sun was going down. And the reason I know that it was late in the day is because everybody in the picture has a very golden look to their faces as they do when the sun is just dropping. Put my little dog in that hole, and just before we covered him over, I reached in my pocket and took out a penny that I had there, and I laid it on the bloody fur of his chest. I really don't know why I did that today, other than that it was my childish way of telling him that I loved him. And my dad, who had told me earlier that day that he wanted me to take that like a man, bawled like a baby back there behind the grapevine. And I think that would have to stand as the saddest day of my life up to this year. Why? Because that event was so important? No, it really wasn't all that important. There have been greater losses since then, much more significant events since then. Then why was it such a difficult day? The answer is because of the emotional vulnerability of being 13 years old. See, when you're a teenager, you experience everything king size. The wonderful things are fantastic. They're unbelievable. The roller coaster rides, the strawberries, the watermelon, everything good is wonderful. And the lows are terrible, and I don't think I can live through tomorrow morning, and I didn't get invited to Helen High School's party, and the world is over, and the highs and lows are just experienced king size. And I tell you that story for two reasons. One is to recommend the game to you because it just pulls that kind of information out and gets you talking about it, puts you into each other's world. But also to remind you of that characteristic of adolescence, which we were talking about this morning. And I think it behooves us to be a little patient when our kids overreact to things that we know really aren't that important because we probably did the same when we were that age. You know, I didn't realize the emotional impact of that story when I first told it to my family. And a few days later, I was in the process of recording those tapes called Preparing for Adolescence, and I thought it would be good to tell that story, just as I did to you now, to give kids a feeling for what their emotions would do during adolescence, the highs and lows and so on. So I did it. I had a cassette recorder, and I recorded it, and took it to the hospital with me the next day. And at that time, I had, without question, folks, the most emotional secretary in the world. This is not just my assessment, this was her assessment of herself. She said she's so emotional she wept at supermarket openings. And so I took that tape in with me the next day, and not thinking, I just walked by her desk and I threw it down there and I said, Jean, why don't you listen to that and tell me what you think of it in a few minutes? Folks, in a few minutes I heard this loud honking noise. And she was wiped out all day long. So I recommend the game to you, and I think you'll find it useful. Well, with this final session, what I want to do with it, and take it very quickly, is talk about what wives wish their husbands knew about women, the subject for the book by the same name, and really it's a topic relating to depression in women, which is very much on the increase at this time. You may be aware of that. All of us who are working with the family have seen an increase in depression among women, even in the last 10 years and even in the last 5 years. It's continuing to increase at this time. The 1950s were called an age of anxiety and stress. Those are the two words to describe the emotions of the 50s. The 1970s are already called, I just saw a yawn, folks, and excuse me, I lost my whole train of thought. The 1970s have already been called an age of depression, particularly with regard to women. Now, I had heard this in counseling situations and in seminars and other places over and over and over, to the point that I got interested in what was behind it. Why the increase in depression? What's causing it? And so I put on a little questionnaire 10 sources of depression that I had heard about over and over in counseling, and then I've asked over 10,000 women to rank order those 10 according to the influence in their own life, putting number 1 by the item that's most distressing and working your way down. Now, that does not meet the rigors of the scientific method, and I don't present this as a scientific study. It's just a little vehicle to convey probably my biases and what I had already assumed with regard to the sources of this depression. But it's interesting to see how the women have ranked this questionnaire. Let me first read you those 10 sources of depression. I wish very quickly those of you who are interested in doing this would take them down, just in shorthand, what have you. And I'll go very fast, and here we go. Now, this is not the order that they were completed. This is just the way they appeared on the questionnaire, largely. 1, absence of romantic love in my marriage. Number 2, in-law conflict. Number 3, low self-esteem. Number 4, problems with the children. Number 5, financial difficulties. Number 6, sexual problems in marriage. Number 7, menstrual and physiological problems. Number 8, loneliness, isolation, and boredom as one item. Number 9, fatigue and time pressure. And number 10, aging. Now, those 10 represent the outline for the book by the same name, What Wives Wish Their Husbands Knew About Women. And what I'd like to do now is give you the results of the survey to see what constitutes, according to this little questionnaire, the number 1 source of depression among women. And I think you might find it interesting. Number 1, would you believe? Those who haven't read my book, let me hear from you. What do you think's number 1? I just heard all 9 of them. Most of you got it right, though. That's correct. Number 1 is low self-esteem. May I see the hands of those of you who got it right? Folks, would you believe, now this was a low-risk group for emotional problems. This was a young group. Most of them were seemingly happily married. Most of them had children. Most of them were housewives. Most of them were middle class. Most of them were making it financially, as much as any middle class group does. Most of them were Christians. Would you believe 80% of that group put low self-esteem in the top 5, and 50% put a number 1 by it? One half the total group marked that number 1. Now that raises some interesting questions. What is there about our culture, our value system, and what's going on in the world of women that makes so many women today bitterly disappointed with who they are, what they feel, and the degree of self-worth that they enjoy? Because I'm convinced it's a major problem. I'm sure that part of the problem is related to the upheaval that's going on in the world of women today. Everything traditionally feminine has turned upside down. Everything that women used to identify with a sense of identity has now been brought into question by somebody. And in my talking to Christian women around the country, not only in counseling, but in seminars and things of this nature, I find that there really are an awful lot of women who adhere to the Christian faith and love the Lord and have all that sense of purpose and meaning, who still have some questions about who they are and what they ought to be doing. And especially those who are in a housewife responsibility, I think, have heard some of the messages that if you are doing that job, and if you chose to do that job, that you're really kind of dumb for doing that job, and that you really ought to be doing something else. Now, I'd like to make it clear that I'm not here to tell women who have a career that they shouldn't have a career. That's not my business. That's not anybody's business. But I tell you what I do feel. It is a great mistake to tell the women who are in a housewife responsibility and are raising little children because they choose to, that they are being cheated and shortchanged and exploited and taken advantage of. I feel that a woman is entitled to make that choice, but little children do have to be taken care of, and once you have those children, those needs have to be met one way or another. But that's really not the purpose for our discussion here. I think there's another element to the depression related to low self-esteem, and it has something to do with a basic difference between men and women. Let me go to a comment about the women's liberation movement. There are many aspects of the women's liberation movement that I think are very healthy. I think it's called attention to the needs of women in some ways that probably needed to be specified or spotlighted. But the least acceptable tenet of the women's liberation movement to me is the notion, sold rather vigorously at this time, that males and females are identical except for the ability to bear children. Folks, that is nonsense. We are not identical. We are different in incalculable ways. We are different anatomically, obviously. We are different emotionally in many ways. One has a menstrual cycle, the other does not. That influences behavior. It influences energy level through the month. We're different sexually. We talked about that before, and I'll talk about it again in a minute. We're different biochemically. We're different in so many ways socially. Part of the difference is cultural, I'm sure of that, but much of it has a genetic origin. We are different beings. God created us male and female, not one sex, but two. Did you know that research shows that if you go onto a high school campus or a college campus, right out there, and you look around at the students there, male and female, without telling them what you're examining, that the females will be carrying their books in a different way than the males. The males, the boys, the men tend to carry their books under one arm like this at their sides. The girls tend to cradle them to their breasts in much the same way they would a baby. There are all kinds of subtle differences between males and females that I think we're not even aware of. And to try to make us one sex has the great disadvantage of making it impossible to admit that there are differences in needs between the two sexes, and therefore it makes it impossible to meet those needs. Now, one of the ways that males and females differ, and I feel it's so important, has to do, in this culture at least, with the way we develop self-esteem. This may be cultural. I don't know how much of it is genetic and cultural. I don't care, but there's a difference. Males in our culture develop self-esteem primarily from their jobs. We men get a sense of self-worth from being respected by our employers and our employees or our patients or our clients or those that we do business with, from building an empire, from earning money, from building condominiums, from being president of the local organization, from earning money, from seeing things grow. Men develop self-esteem from that. You want to see men get depressed the same way women get depressed? Just let a man get laid off. You'll touch him where he lives. His self-worth tends to be identified with the job. And when the job is not going right, he doesn't feel good about himself. Those things are all entangled for a man. When men get together and they're trying to impress each other, what do they say? Well, what do you do? Well, I'm president of this, and we're building that, and I own that, and I started this company 5 years ago. See, they exchange information about their jobs, not their families. They don't say, well, my wife is doing very well, and I got 2 children that are in football. They talk primarily about the jobs. That's where our self-esteem comes from. And I tell you all, that's why it is very easy for men to do what I was talking about this morning, and that's work about 14 to 15 hours a day. Every man alive can look you in the eye and tell you why he has to work as hard as he is. And most of us men have convinced our wives that it's true. We have to work that hard. And I suppose, in a sense, it is. But the deeper meaning is we work that hard because we want to work that hard, because we meet our needs by working that hard. My wife and children give me a sense of balance because I love what I do, and without them, I could work 15 hours a day. I love what I do. And most men love what they do. And if they don't, they fish around for something they do love. So it's very easy for men to overcommit themselves for that purpose. Now, if men develop self-esteem primarily from the job, a woman at home raising small children develops self-esteem primarily from her relationship with her husband. It's a very controversial point. Some will agree, some will disagree. I could not be more convinced of it. This is, you see, why there is so much agitation on the part of the wife, which is not understood often or received by the husband, because he's coming from a different emotional frame of reference. See, her self-esteem depends on the romantic part of the relationship, and his doesn't. It doesn't mean he doesn't need it. It doesn't mean he doesn't want it. It doesn't mean he doesn't love his wife. It's just that self-worth is rooted out there for him, and self-worth is rooted in here for her. And that sets up 10,000 problems. See, that's why a wife is reaching for her husband when he's home. That's why she's trying to get him out of the newspaper. That's why she hates Monday Night Football so badly. That's why she despises Howard Cosell. I got another fan club. I heard a woman the other day said that her husband watched so many sporting events on television that if she ever decided to divorce him, he wouldn't even know it unless they announced it on Wide World of Sports. This is why the anniversary is more important to her than it is to him, and why he gets chewed up when he forgets it. It's going to be a long afternoon, I can see that. There's great tension between men and women over this point. I want to tell you something interesting. It would be a disaster for me to have started last night talking to you about this subject, and I really mean it. Because there is such tension over this point that husbands and wives feel it, and it will enter a room like this. And when I talk to men about this subject, they bat their eyes at me and they say, what is the guy trying to say? And when I talk to women about this subject and the men aren't there, it's like putting a match to gasoline. There is a great difference in perspective on this issue. The romantic side of the relationship is not just a frill to a woman. It is essential, especially if she's going to stay home and raise little children. It is the only way that she can do that and stay alive emotionally is if there is maintained between them a love relationship that has some meaning. All right, let's hurry on. But that's, you see, why a man can be very contented with a kind of a business partnership for a marriage. It's not the man that comes to me and says, my marriage is driving me crazy. That doesn't happen very often. Women come and say it, and a man comes in and says, I don't know what's wrong with the woman. She's got a dishwasher and a garbage disposal. Number two, when this program's over, I'm going to leave quickly. Number two, fatigue and time pressure, very closely related to number one. Folks, I'm going to let you in on a little secret. You remember this morning, the main topics that I talked about were fatigue and time pressure and low self-esteem. I wasn't really talking about your kids. I was really talking about you and me, because these are the two most common sources of depression in a family today, and I think they're ripping the family apart. We're overcommitted, we're racing, we're running, we're exhausted, and what happens when you are, you don't meet each other's needs. See, those are very closely related. And for some reason, men can tolerate that kind of overcommitted schedule a whole lot better than women can. And in fact, again, the understanding that takes place here is sometimes kind of interesting. I was speaking in Kansas City on this subject, and I had a mixed audience and a smaller group than this, and we were able to interact, which is a lot of fun. And there's a little man sitting over here, an older fellow that raised his hands, and he said, I want to ask something. I said, okay. He said, I want to know something. Now that women have washing machines and garbage disposals and dishwashers and all that stuff, what do they do with their time? Folks, I thought those women were going to kill him. In a few minutes, he slipped out the side door and was gone. But I think there is a factor that ought to be mentioned here, is that sometimes we husbands, I include myself in this, are not aware of how exhausting small children can be. I'd make a great politician. I probably would not be aware of that fact. In fact, there was a time in my life when I wasn't aware of that fact. But I had an experience that brought me into an understanding. In 1973, when Shirley and I went to Vail, Colorado, I was responsible for a medical conference that was to start there that day with 100 doctors, and I had all that pressure and everything, and Shirley selected that day to break her leg. Very unkind, unthoughtful thing that she did. And I want to tell you, that experience of a broken leg is much more painful than advertised, because we had quite a struggle. Shirley was in the hospital for 7 or 8 days there, and they thought she had a pulmonary blood clot in the lungs, and I had an awful time getting her home, and it was a great deal of pain. I had to walk along in front of her carrying that cast, which is a very humbling experience. And we finally got home, and I had an opportunity because of that. I took off work, and I had a chance for about 2 weeks to do her thing. And believe me, I found out a whole lot about the color of the grass on the other side of the fence during that time. It not only wasn't any greener, it wasn't even edible. Ryan was 2 years of age then, and Danae was 7, and Ryan was a full-blown toddler by then. And the first morning on the job, 6 a.m., he woke me up screaming. And I don't wake up easily in the morning. I didn't this morning, and I didn't in that morning. And I got up, and I'd had all that trouble getting Shirley home, and I was exhausted, and it was 6 a.m., and I didn't know where I was, and he's yelling from the other side of the house. And I literally felt my way across the house to his room. The door was shut. He was still crying. When I got there, I pushed open the door, and immediately the crying stopped, and a cheery little voice said, "Is breakfast ready?" I said, "I'm doing the best I can, Ryan." So I went into the kitchen to try to get the kids something palatable to eat, and I was standing there staring into the cabinets, hoping something quick and easy would tumble out. And I wanted to just get back in bed before I got waked up, you know. And Ryan crawled down from his crib, and he followed me into the kitchen. And at that time, he was talking 1,000 miles an hour, and he just loves to talk. And folks, the last thing I needed on that morning was conversation with a toddler. You ever felt like that? I just didn't feel like I could talk to that kid. And he could ask 1,000 questions an hour. He knows no limit to the number of questions. I mean, it's infinite. He asked his mother one day, said, "Mom," "What, Ryan?" "Do worms yawn?" He was asking me those kinds of questions, and he was saying, "Are we having bacon? And why isn't the milk poured? And is it almost ready?" And I was ignoring him. I just didn't feel like talking to him. I had a headache, and I was just looking up in those cabinets, and he must have asked me 12 or 14 questions that didn't get an answer. And then I tuned in on him just in time to hear him grow exasperated, and he folded his little arms and he said, "I am getting so tired of you." So what's a mother to do, folks? I don't know. I told Shirley if she would just come back to work that I'd rise up and call her blessed. But I learned during that time something of what it's like to take care of a house and a couple of kids, and it is pretty exhausting. And this is a matter of considerable tension, I think, between men and women, having to do with this fatigue factor. I have a little note here that was handed to me by a woman. It's no big deal. It was at a conference like this, and she said, "Will you please discuss this? Dad arrives home, reads the newspaper, eats dinner, talks on the phone, watches TV, takes a shower, and goes to bed. This is a constant daily routine. It never changes. On Sunday, we go to church, then come home. We take a nap, and then it's back to work on Monday morning. Our daughter is 9, and we're not communicating, and life is speeding by in this deadly routine." That's depressing. Those feelings are depressing, that life's getting away from us and there aren't any human contacts. And I think it behooves us to slow it down. Now, I talked this morning about slowing it down. It's so easy to talk about it. I mean, you can just stand here and talk about it. It's taken me 1 year to slow it down, and it'll be October 22nd of this year before I really begin to breathe. It's hard to slow it down. You've made commitments in advance. How do you slow it down? I do not know. All I know is that it takes the same kind of discipline that any other area of self-control takes. It's like eating. How do you keep from eating too much? How do you keep from gaining weight? How do you keep from getting overweight? You just say, "I won't eat it, but I want it." I know, but I must not eat it. It just takes guts, you see. By the way, those of you who have a problem with overweight, I can tell you what the problem is. It's cottage cheese. If you'll notice, nobody but fat folks eat that stuff. There are all kinds of books out that'll tell you how you can eat all you want without getting fat, you know, but it's not true. They tell you can eat like a horse and it isn't going to have any effect on you. Folks, if you eat like a horse, you're going to look like a horse. Can't do it. It takes discipline, and this area takes discipline too. Now, there have been times in my life when I've done it poorly. I don't like to talk about those. Times in my life when I've violated everything I believe in this regard. There have been other times when I did it better. I'd rather share that with you. A year ago, January, I agreed to write The Strong-Willed Child for Tyndale House Publishers. And they came to me and they said, "We need this book out in the summer for what's called a Christian Booksellers Conference. And if you don't get it out for that, it's really a year before it gets known. The very latest we can get it ready is if you get it to us by April 15th. And I said, "Boy, that's really moving, but I'll do what I can." So I set out a little schedule for myself, 4 pages a day, which is really clipping for me. I don't know how fast you write, but that's moving. Because when I get through writing, nobody has to mess with it, and I do all my own writing. So that means clean, finished pages. And I had a little linear graph there, and I filled it in each day. And I was writing 4 pages a day, and I made it all through January and all through February. And I came to the end of the February, and I was still on target. But I got into an overcommitted time schedule where I was gone a couple of weekends, 1 weekend here and another weekend there, and there was one in the middle that was very important for making contact with my family because I'd been gone the weekend before and going to be gone next weekend. So I reserved that middle weekend, and everything took that middle weekend by surprise. I had responsibilities on Saturday that I hadn't counted on. I had a Sunday school class on Sunday morning. My pastor interviewed me in front of about 1,000 people on Sunday night, and the weekend was gone. So that meant 3 weekends plus 6 days on either side of that I had not been in touch with my family. And I called my secretary, who is here today, by the way. Where are you, Dee? Dee and Anita, 2 members of my staff. Where are you? Sitting right down here. That's me. Glad you could be here. I called Dee and I asked her to cancel whatever I had on my schedule for Monday. And the next morning, I asked Shirley to get on her grubby clothes. Not that all her clothes are grubby, do you understand? I asked her to get on some grubby clothes and didn't tell her where we were going. After the kids were in school, we got in the car and we drove down to an area in California called Newport Beach. It's the loneliest stretch of beach that I could find. In fact, folks, in February, it is not hard to find a parking spot at the beach. And we found this place where the rocks kind of jutted out into the water and made sort of a little walkway out there. And we worked our way out to the farthest end of that where the water was splashing all around us and the sound of that water was with us. We took our Bibles, had our devotions out there for about an hour, talked to the Lord, talked to each other. Took our calendars, talked about where we'd been, where we were going, what we wanted to do with our lives, what we didn't want to do with our lives. I asked her what she needed to say to me that she hadn't been able to say, and she asked me the same question. Spent about an hour and a half out there just enjoying each other's company with the wind in our faces, seagulls around. Walked back to the sandy beach and took about a 3, 4, 5 mile walk up the beach, holding hands, being together. Spent the balance of the day going in and out of little shops down there at Newport and just talking together and being together. And I really believe, and I think Shirley would agree, that that was the most meaningful day of our married life. But there was a price tag on it. Because of that event, I fell behind on my schedule with the strong-willed child, and I lost motivation because there's no way to catch up, and I didn't get my book finished April 15th. In fact, I didn't finish it till August 15th, and the book was not ready for the Christian Booksellers Conference, and I didn't meet my deadline. But I have to ask myself, so what? You see, again, when I assess what's really important in life, and I'm looking back over it, it will not be a publisher's deadline that'll make the difference. What will be important will be Shirley and me and the people that we care about. That's what I will remember with significance. And if that's true, why don't I let it dictate my policies and my priorities? And besides that, if God wants that book out, he's got a way to get it out. And that book sold over 50,000 copies in 7 weeks' time, and no book I've ever written has sold that fast without the Christian Booksellers Conference. So I think if we put our priorities in place, that the rest of it will fall into place. And you have to decide how to do that. Maybe you need a sign like I saw on an estate out there in Los Angeles that said, no admittance, admittance by appointment only, no appointments. Another woman said, I finally got it all together, but I can't remember where I left it. Folks, I collect signs. It's just one of my collections. Some people collect stamps and coins and other things. I collect signs, and I find them fascinating because signs like that tell you something about the people who write them, and that's kind of an interest of mine. So if you have any signs like that, I wish you'd give them to me. I think of all my signs, my favorite one is a sign that appears on a wire fence around a convent in Santa Monica, California, which says, absolutely no trespassing. Trespassers will be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. Signed, Sisters of Mercy. I saw a little card the other day. In fact, I've got it, and it's a little card that is designed for you to hand to someone in an airport who's blowing smoke on you. Okay? It says, I dip snuff. If you won't blow your smoke on me, I won't spit on you. Folks, there's a world of signs in the post office. Have you seen them? Man, there's all kinds of signs in the post office. I just love to go in there and browse around. I know they think I'm crazy. On the door of the post office, it says, no dogs allowed, and in little letters underneath it says, except seeing eye dogs, right? Who's that written for? The blind man can't see it, and the dog can't read it. There is also on the bulletin board in the post office there a sign that says, it is a federal offense to assault a postal employee. And in little letters underneath it says, while he's on duty. You can kill him on his own time, you see. All right, numbers 3 and 4. Boy, our time is going. Loneliness, isolation, and boredom. And absence of romantic love and marriage. They tied. And isn't it interesting that they did so? Now, folks, this is what I want you to understand. These 10 items do not represent 10 separate sources of depression. They represent 10 separate manifestations of the same source of depression, which is the breakdown in a relationship between people, primarily husbands and wives. Don't you see how these are connected? Fatigue and time pressure, everybody exhausted, they're not meeting each other's needs, people don't know each other, they don't care for each other, and low self-esteem is an outgrowth of that, and that spells depression with a capital D. And in fact, 1/3 of that total group put low self-esteem, loneliness, isolation, and boredom, and absence of romantic love and marriage in the top 5. Do you know what that says? Low self-esteem, I don't like myself. Loneliness, isolation, and boredom, I don't have any friends among all those people out there. Absence of romantic love and marriage, I don't even have it in the person that I'm married to. That's the whole world. Myself, other people, my mate. That's everybody. And that's depression. Depression grows out of a breakdown in these meaningful contacts between people. And when your lifestyle makes it impossible for you to get that kind of feedback from people that say, you're important to me, I care about you, I love you, I need you, what you're doing is important as what I'm doing, then anger is generated, and anger and depression are very closely related. Anger at circumstances, anger at people, and all the rest of it. And I need to say something to the women who are here. I've hit the men awful hard today, and boy, this is a two-sided picture, and I've really left it kind of lopsided. But may I say to you women that I really believe men have not changed that much in the last 100 years. You see, I really doubt if men have ever met women's emotional needs the way they'd like for them to. I doubt seriously if the farmer came in from the field and said, tell me how it was with the kids today. I don't think men have ever done that the way women want them to. So what's changed? Why is depression on the increase? It results primarily from a breakdown in a relationship between women. You think that over after you leave here. See, 100 years ago, women cooked together, and they canned together, and they washed clothes together, and they had babies together. When a baby was born, all the women came in, and they showed her how to put on diapers and how to take care of the child. They had remedies for everything. They taught her how to discipline. There was support. There were grandmothers and mothers. There were neighbors. They got together to do things. There was a sense of camaraderie, a sense of love, a sense of partnership among women. And that has deteriorated. It is gone. The women that live on this side of me in our city and community have never been in the home of the women that live on this side of us. And neither one of them know the lady across the street very well. There is a breakdown in the relationship between women. We're a moving society, a mobile society. People move into a neighborhood. They're only there 2 or 3 years. They don't get acquainted. They go to church, but there's such a kind of a phony, unreal mask that we put on, all our nice clothes, and we sit and we smile. We never let anybody know we're dying inside. And people don't meet each other's needs. I believe that one of the answers to depression is for women to get into each other's worlds. Meet together for support groups. Not just Bible studies, although it explains why Bible studies are on the increase like they are. People want to know the Word, but they want the Word to meet their needs. But meet together to care for one another, pray for one another. When someone's hurting, reach out to them. And I think the depression would be very much on the decrease instead. But you see, if a woman waits for her husband to meet all those needs, it's impossible. It can't be done. And he comes home and walks in the door tired, and she is ready for her needs to be met and wants to talk and all the rest of it, and that's important, but he can't meet them all. There's got to be social interaction in the rest of the day.
This concludes the first half of what wives wish their husbands knew about women. Dr. Dobson will continue his discussion on marriage in part 7 of the series and present the remaining 6 sources of depression in women. Hope you can join us.